Good afternoon. As we come to the seventh session of the conclave, it's a panel discussion on the implementation of universal ethics in the modern education, some dilemmas and solution. For this session, may I please welcome Dr. Anita Dudani ji, a chairperson of this session on the dais. And I would like to welcome all the panelists to take their respective chairs, followed by their names. Mrs. Anshu Sahi ji, Mrs. Sandy Dias ji, Dr. Nivedita Chalil ji, and Professor Bindu Puri ji. I would like to give a brief introduction of Dr. Anita Dudani ji. She is a consultant allergist, clinical immunologist. After completing her medical studies in India, she received her postgraduate training and fellowship from New York Medical College. For the panel discussion, all the respected panelists will be given 5 minutes to speak and half an hour interaction session amongst panelists, followed by half an hour question and answer session. Without further ado, I would hand it over my mic to Dr. Anita Dudani ji to chair the person. Over to you. Thank you.
So this is welcome to this really important session on how to implement all the various things that we've been talking for the last day and a half. But we have to realize this is a talk on ethics, so let's be fair to all the speakers so that everyone gets a turn to speak. And let's have empathy for all the audience who's going to be thinking about food. So let's please finish on time so everyone can get to their lunch. So really important to do that. So I'm going to do away with all the introductions. You can read all the various introductions in the pamphlet you have. And I'm going to really follow Dr. Suneja's advice of being like the Vice President of India and stay out of it unless I'm really required. So let's start with the first speaker, Dr. Ms. Anshu Sahi. Please do remember to be on time, and all women on this panel, so let's please show them that we don't speak so much and we speak to the point.
So before the presentation is starting, I would like to thank on the bottom of my heart and the organizer, rest of the organizers, especially also the Ramanujan College. And I would also like to thank the mentors which we have for us, for our organization. I belong to an organization known as Ayurgyan Nyas, and we are making a curriculum for school children based on universal ethics. And so our mentors are Samdong Rinpoche ji and Geshe-la Samten ji. So they are guiding us in preparing this curriculum. So our topic is the dilemma of education. So you can see these dilemmas are posed here. Most of us are know these dilemmas. Just now we were hearing these children talking about academic excellence, talking about that their parents wanted them to take a particular subject. So the first dilemma is that our education system is all the time talking about the academic learning. That results into a materialism, and students are more disengaged. When we were growing up at that time, there were not so many I can say that distractions available, but now today you've got a mobile phone. On the mobile phone you've got WhatsApp, you must see your Facebook, you must comment on whosoever is there Facebook, whether you're in a class, whether with a teacher or without a teacher. So all this is, so that disengagement is there in the children. Students increase in the level of stress. So anybody you talk to, they will always say we are stressed. We are stressed about our education system. We are stressed about examination system. We are stressed by the parents, and we are stressed by the teachers. Breaking of the joint family system, then and crisis value of dehumanization of the society. We have been talking about the cases. We are in the middle of all those cases which are going on. I'm not going to go on them, but this is what is the paradox yesterday ma'am was talking about, which His Holiness says. So we have got that we build more computers to make more copies than ever, but we don't communicate with our neighbors. We have learned to make living, but not life. Added years to life, but not life to years. Steep profit, but shallow relationship. And it is time we can choose either to make a difference or shrug off and forget we are facing an abyss. Yesterday, somebody said that this is the time we must do something about it because we are at an abyss, and I truly agree with that person. So yesterday, throughout these deliberation, people have been talking about emotional learning, and which is known as the social emotional learnings. And we can see that the process of these learnings is to make a good human being. And it is not that it is not present in the education system. It was present in the Indian education system also in the school education system in the form of life skills. So these life skills were making you to be able to cope in the society. But these life skills or the social emotional learning as it is being taught, it didn't give time for internalization. That is what is the problem in the education system. That we taught them something, but we did not, or the teachers did not help them to internalize. So that is one of the dilemma of the present day education system. And the critique of social emotional learning are that we talk, in the social emotional learning, we talk about self, me, myself, and I also talk about a little bit of you, that is the society. How will I deal with your emotions and how the society is going to deal with the emotions. And we don't talk about the universality. What my action, what your action is going to do to the environment around us. So this is the basic critique of social emotional learning, which we have tried to deal little bit through universal ethical education, and which is based fundamentally on His Holiness's principles, which are two. One is shared humanity. Whatever decision we are taking in our life, please don't forget about the shared humanity and the interdependence. It is, there's a very interesting book which I've recently read, which was Biology of Belief. So it is written by a doctor who's Dr. Lipton, and he's a cell biologist, and I, being a biologist myself, we realized that it is not the genetics only which gives you the understanding, or which gives you how to develop yourself, how to develop your emotions. So, is it my time which is getting up?
Yeah, I'll give you one moment.
Okay, so this is what is about emotional learning. So our perspective is from me to you to we. We have also included me, from you, and then to we, which is the universal perspective of it. And these are the 4 pillars on which our curriculum is based, which are the 4 pillars of His Holiness. One is universal restraint, virtue, ethics of restraint, ethics of virtue, ethics of compassion, ethics of discernment, and universal responsibility. We have already published 2 books. And these are facilitators' guides. I don't have more copies of this with me. I'm very sorry. But if anybody is interested in knowing about it, we can send these copies to you. And thank you very much. I hope I was
Thank you, Ms. Sahi, for speaking about mainly universality and reiterating the problems that the students face. The next speaker is Ms. Sandy Diaz.
can put this on. I don't need this. Just do.
All right. I'm happy to be sharing something that's quite close to my heart. I have not really called it under the term universal ethics, to be honest, but I think it is similar. And so when we are talking about universal ethics, let's be very clear, we're not talking really about a philosophical construct or a concept. We are really talking about matters of the heart. So what we've been talking about are things like kindness, compassion, interdependence, others over self. All of this are matters of the heart. And so when we are thinking about bringing universal ethics in the field of education, then we have to get into the heart space. But how do you get into the heart space if not through relationship, not through human connection? There's no other way of doing it. And as a psychotherapist, as a psychologist, this is really the bedrock of what we do, of simply understanding this relational space and the conditions that kind of like provide for this space. And so when we get invited to schools to do a session, maybe a session on mindfulness or emotional regulation, it's usually we're invited to do sessions for the students. So give them something, give them some skills to kind of, help them deal with stress. But what we turn around and ask the school is, can we work with your teachers first? And there is the relevance of the modules of working with students. But we have to understand this, that when we are working in this area where it is the heart that we are talking about, then we have to be working with the adults around the children, which not only are the teachers, but actually also including the parents, also including the whole support environment, and really need to include all of that. And the reason for that, why is that important? I think it has been covered in many ways so far. But the reason why it is important is that the only way we can know about kindness is to experience it. The only way we can touch into that space of kindness within ourselves is to experience that. And I'd like to make the focus of this largely around kindness and compassion. Okay? It's really, it doesn't take too much. It doesn't take too much to bring this in. It's really quite simple. And it just requires, really looking at someone, making that connection. It is just maybe that pat on the back that I understand you, I see you, you're important. And that these messages are received in, they don't have to be even stated, but they're received. And it is probably this kind of like environment of just being there, of just listening, of just seeing, of just being available, that probably where it's created, where this flower of basic goodness that we were talking about yesterday, that maybe that comes forth. And And this is also what neuroscience kind of like shares, and it's in line with that. And I'd really like to bring in two principles. Two principles that I bring into the work is that one is the principle of attunement, and the other, the principle of resonance. Now, I think Jayshela referred to it in the morning, but just to give you an example, just to make it clear, is that what happens when a baby is crying, when a young infant is crying, and how does maybe a good enough mother respond to that crying baby? And most likely what she would do is pick up the baby, and then there is the warmth of touch, and then there is the eye contact, and then there is the tone of voice that is soothing. And when she does that, the physiology of the baby, there is the regulation that happens over there. But there is also this other bit that she cannot be in a state of distress. The baby is in a state of distress, but she is in a state of calm. This is the basis of regulation. Okay, this is the basis of emotional regulation, and this is the basis of empathy. This is the way we form human connection, and this is the way we understand social relationships. So what may be really required is to kind of create these environments, create these holding spaces, nurturing, holding, listening spaces for children. And while that is being said, I'd just like to highlight 2 to 3 points, is that in order to create that, you need adults to be in a restful state. You need some restful awareness to be there in order to create that. And therefore, the teacher really needs to be met. It's not like she's not trying to do something, but how do we create these restful spaces for learning within families, within schools, for the adults, so that children can also experience this sense of rest? Then there's nothing much to be done. Then whenever kindness shows up, whenever there's patience, whenever there is generosity, which shows up in how they are relating to the world, then all that has to be done is recognize it and hold it for them. And then that gets embedded and gets deepened as something that they will have and refer to. And the other thing that I just want to kind of like end with is that, it is said that we can't really solve the problems of the mind by the very mind that has created it. And it is really imperative that we have another place of looking and another way of knowing and looking at the whole picture, all aspects of it. And this is no longer, it's become quite critical that this is no longer the work that we can do individually, nor can it be done from a philosophical construct or a belief. It has to be the collective. And therefore, I am really deeply thankful to Venerable Dorji Damdul for really bringing this together. And because this is really very much what is needed in looking at what we are looking at and what we are facing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy, for pointing out that we are here not to just talk about philosophy or a concept, but what matters is really the implementation, the kindness, the compassion, the heart, creating the space for children to relate to us. It was such a beautiful presentation that I forgot to look at the time. So let's start the next one. Dr. Nivedita Chalil. Thank you. No, don't do it so fast.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you to Tibet House, Venerable Geshe Dorji Damdul, and Ramanujan College for allowing me to be here. Given that it's a pre-lunch session, given that it focuses on dilemmas and solutions, and given that I have 5 minutes, I'm going to present the simplest ethical problem that I could come up with. So let's say Sandy has a pencil. We've been sitting close to each other in the morning. I like the pencil. And when she's distracted, I simply steal it. What would you tell me? Quickly, I have 5 minutes. Don't take what is not given to you. What else? Come on, there's no right and wrong answer. Or maybe there is. Sorry, it'll land you into a problem. Beautiful. Anything else? Not yet. Okay. To know the consequences to the action. Lovely. So if you recognize there are 3 areas in which you're giving me input. One is the consequence of the action. Does Sandy know that her pencil has been taken? How will Sandy perhaps feel? The second, the act itself. Is it intrinsically good or bad? And third, and possibly the other thing that you could ask me is, do I want to be the kind of person who steals a pencil? So the first part of it is what we call a consequential stand. The second one is a deontological position. Both of these can be refuted. I can distract myself from Sandy and say, she may be unhappy, but I'm happy now. Or, for example, I could just say stealing is not really intrinsically good or bad. It would depend on the context. But when you come down to my value position, do I want to be the kind of person who steals a pencil? Now, I can't really find a way of escaping that. So when we talk about ethical dilemmas, a large chunk of our ethical dilemmas is when we live a life which is kind of divorced from our values and which is divorced from our ethical considerations. So living like that, which often is actually also aggravated and triggered by the fact that we are so distracted with technology and so heightened with consumerism, that we don't need to necessarily focus on who we are, what our inner values are. Are we really living in alignment with those or not? And as a result of that, again, that there is a certain amount of discord, because I may think of myself as a nice person who doesn't really steal, but then again, this happened. So resulting in a kind of discord on the inside. And this, of course, is a really simplistic example. And we all of us know, I mean, mental health for 20 years, there's only gray I've discovered. I'm not sure what is black and white anymore. But like all of you have been discussing and highlighting, the idea of how does one really find the solution and how does one move towards a slightly more authentic life, which is in connection with one's inner values. So correcting this and recognizing this leads to also and promotes happiness, simply because now we have a sense of who we are and are we living along those lines. And the solution to both, really, the ethical dilemma as well as finding happiness, because if you ask any one of us in this room, whether it's the students who were cribbing about the education system, and after so many years in the education system, I echo and understand your sentiment. As a teacher also, I recognize the issues of the system. The idea is we're doing all that we do to chase happiness and to really avoid suffering. And if that's the intention, can we also move closer inward to start rectifying and recognizing our own inner values so that we live more in accordance with those? There's a very sweet story. Have you all heard of Nasiruddin Hoja? Yes? Okay, I'm happy to see some nods. It's one of my favorite characters. So there was a story when Nasiruddin Hoja, he's an old Turkish character who's supposed to be extremely wise and also extremely eccentric. In a crowded marketplace, this horse comes galloping down with Hoja on it. And everybody has to kind of move away, and they're all shocked and surprised. And finally somebody yells, "Hey, Hoja, where are you going in this mad tearing rush?" And he turns around and says, "I don't know, ask the horse." So this is us. Our habits are taking us everywhere at mad galloping pace. But we're not stopping to say, hey, where's my habit taking me? And our habits are coming from our conditioning, from our personality traits, from the nurturing, from everything else that is around us. And if we are able to perhaps start hitting pause and start saying, who am I? Where is it that I want to go with my life? And what are the values that I want to imbibe and live by? That perhaps moves us into a more conscious space where we can stay mindful. Where we can stay mindful, we can practice, we can create new habits to challenge old habits. And with that bell, I will take leave. Thank you very much once again. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Chalil. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation and on time. Do I really want to be this person? And who we think we are and who we really are, if they are in harmony, that leads to happiness. And that's what I get from your presentation, which was really fantastic. So for our final speaker, Professor Bindu Puri, you can have the dais again, 5 minutes if possible, please.
So I would like to begin by thanking Ramanujan College and Tibet House for giving me this opportunity. And I'm speaking about the implementation of universal ethics in modern education. I think if we look for a single characteristic that describes our world, we'll find the characteristic plurality. And plurality obviously leads to difference and thereby to conflict. Now, what is the way out of conflict? The way out of conflict is if we develop an education system whereby we'll be able to imbibe students with some kind of universal values that they share with the rest of humanity, which draws them close to other people and helps them to overcome the difference. That's why many neoliberals now speak about values being imparted through education system. For instance, they speak about liberal values like civic friendship, tolerance, and so on. But coming closer to home, what are the universal values that we can give through an education system that might bring people together? So you think about ahimsa, you think about karuna, compassion, which a previous speaker spoke about. But I think when Gandhi, for instance, spoke about compassion, spoke about ahimsa, the ethics of ahimsa involved compassion, what we call gift of fearlessness to other people, and self-sacrifice. Now, these get related together in a beautiful way because you can only feel compassion towards other people if you don't fear their difference. Now, if you're afraid of them because they have a different religion, a different gender, you cannot be compassionate towards them. And once you stop being scared of them, you feel compassion towards them, you gift them fearlessness from yourself. And that's really how conflicts, dissipate. Karuna is, of course, everybody knows, so very important in Buddhist ethics as well. Now, when you look at, how biologists have looked at compassion. So earlier you were given the idea that human beings really are totally egoistic, but more recently we look at altruistic emotions also as part of our biological makeup. But it doesn't stop there because compassion is something which is not just an instinct. People can be educated into becoming more compassionate. And that's really the point of what I'm speaking over here. Aristotle says that there are three thoughts involved in compassion. Number one, that a serious bad thing has happened to somebody else, that was not entirely that person's fault. And number three, that we are also vulnerable in similar ways. Therefore, compassion forms a link between our self-interest and other people's good and ill. But the problem is that many people cannot make that connection, which is why you find today that people who have normal relations with other people feel affectionate towards their family members, victimize others, and do not feel their pain because they are different, because they belong to a different religion, caste, gender, nation. So what do you need? You need to be able to bring your moral and emotional natures into some kind of harmony. And how can you do that? That can only happen through an education which teaches you that you are citizens of the world and not a citizen of this nation, this culture, this tribe, this language group. And this really is why I was bringing in Martha Nussbaum, who has written this interesting book, For Love of Country, where she picks up arguments as to why you should have such a cosmopolitan education. And I think we feel it being in India because it's a plural country, but there are all kinds of arguments. For instance, that when you learn about other people, you learn more about yourself. You understand your difference from other people. You also learn to make headway in problems, because after all, you have to live together with other people. So in a certain sense, people who think they belong to this group and they can go along with belonging to that group and not care about people who are different from themselves will eventually break down the very things that they need to survive, right? Because you need to cooperate with other people to survive. You recognize obligations to the rest of the world, even to the non-human other, to the environment, if you are able to be educated like that. In this way, once you start thinking of other people as members of the same human family, you'll be able to extend your emotional imagination and bring your emotional and moral natures into harmony. And compassion, which is a central Buddhist virtue, is very, very important to this enterprise. So I'll just end with the words of Gandhi on ahimsa, which I think is very important for us all today. This is the path of ahimsa. It may entail continuous suffering and the cultivation of endless patience. Thus, step by step, we learn to make friends with the entire world. We realize the greatness of God or truth, and our worldly, kind of preoccupations diminish, and so does the evil within us diminish. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Puri. I think we have all been very good with time. Sadly. So we've all been very good with time. So I think I'm going to open, let's first bring to the points of what Dr. Bindu Puri said. Basically that what are universal ethics? Can we make it more local? So she brought up ahimsa and karuna according to what Gandhiji said. And basically the fearlessness is the root of compassion. So I'm going to open this out to the public. You didn't get to ask many questions for the first session as well. So let's start with some question answers. Yeah, so you can ask. You can speak, you can ask your question. We can hear most of the time, we can hear, so it's okay.
Like, since you're a psychiatric social worker, it's mentioned there. So this question was raised yesterday but could not go ahead. So even in the previous session, we heard about that we should look into the lives of the people who have done good, and so that we can take some message from them. So what about the other extreme case? Like since even Professor Bindu Puri talked about education, like it's about people should be educated. So as a social worker, what do you have to say about the other extreme of the people, that should they be educated about, or so that's
Just to clarify, so when you're saying the other extremes, as in people
who go to the other extremes of being unethical.
Okay, so should their lives be explored as well?
Yeah.
Would you like to? Can I? Okay. I think that people by default are not good or bad. And I frankly feel that if I have to choose one of the two, I will say they are inherently good because there is tremendous capacity there for change. And therefore, as long as there is potential for change, one can look at an action as being bad. And then the question is, why is the action being bad or unhelpful or perhaps unwholesome? And then one can usually find several factors, including the way our society is today. And at some point of time, if you can recognize interdependence, which means that a zillion factors almost has led to you being here today and me being here today having this interaction. And similarly, there are a zillion factors that have led to that person behaving in a certain way as well. And it is possible to bring change because what we are saying is you're not inherently bad. So looking into the causes and conditions. So for example, we've all been horrified by the story of the girl in J&K area. But there are so many factors, including politics, including religion, including anger, including suppressed rage, including the politics and unrest of that entire space. And it's difficult to look at an action without seeing that entire context. So, of course, there is definitely a need to look into it because ethics really requires that. And at the same time, what seems like a larger macro level issue also has a micro level answer of saying, can individual happiness also be a goal? Because when the individual is more content and more happy, the sense is that our actions are more wholesome.
What would you say, first I'll ask Sandy could maybe look at this, what are the deepest roots of conflict? What's the deepest root of conflict? If we could get some feeling about that, we might have a ground to develop other qualities.
So,
And then maybe the philosophical perspective too,
Right.
if Professor Puri wants to.
so through this is mainly from listening, right, to people who are in conflict, and often one of the major things of the conflict is a sense of alienation. I don't belong, or I'm not important, or so the sense of belongingness or the sense of togetherness is something that we can cultivate or develop. That's one thing that comes to my mind. Yeah.
The inner conflict as well, the conflict in the mind that makes you unhappy or disturbed or restless.
Right.
Can I maybe come in over there?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that I think it's difference which leads to conflict. It's difference. It is no difference from other people. So the minute you think that somebody is different from yourself, you seem to, it starts alienating you from the other person. You start being fearful of that person. And it's interesting that people think all differences are really socially constructed. But there are recent kind of psychological experiments on babies done in North America and Canada, which I was just looking at, where very small babies, when they are given a choice, say, between a donut and a jelly bean, and then they choose the jelly bean, and then they see other children choosing the jelly bean, they tend to be more sympathetic to those children who have chosen the jelly bean. So interesting, huh? So this is how. So people, therefore, it keeps getting more and more complicated. So when you see someone with another religion, because they are so different from you, and then all kinds of layers and layers of fear and suspicion feed into each other. I feel difference from the other, the sense of another person as the other, is the source of conflict.
Yes, I'd like to bring that in. This and also from the point of view of kindness and compassion. A lot of the times the inner conflict, this kind of almost like an internal war going on between something that is wanted and like jumping from here and there. And very often in the work, it's in terms of meeting these paths, befriending it with kindness, and really listening to this inner sense that even if there are these opposing factors within, that if there is enough of a chance given for this path to say and to be held with kindness, it usually does not kind of create so much of turmoil. And then there is more of a sense of equilibrium. So sometimes when people aren't able to just stay with something, to really engage in this dialogue, that what is it? And to really engage with that part that's like really coming up and really listening to that space with this sense of kindness and acceptance.
Dr. Meenakshi has a question.
Yeah, I just had a question for Sandy, not a question, more a clarification. So you talked about, in the context of empathy, you talked about the principle of attunement and resonance, and you described it a little bit, but I was just wondering if you have a kind of a methodology or which actually works, and how do we do it with very young children?
Yes.
Or with older children, or is it only because, like in Canada, they have a program called Roots of Empathy program, and that works in a particular way. So they have a method, they train teachers for it, and so on in the elementary school classroom. So I wonder if you have something for that with in the context of these principles.
Yeah. So the way we bring this, we do a lot of mindfulness-based work. So in terms of bringing mindful awareness, and also working with embodying it. In the sense of working with the body and bringing in this bodily awareness in this interaction that is taking place. So what's happening is that, so there is something that is getting triggered, and then there is a response in the body, and how to stay with that response and allow that. And so in the resonance, what is picked up by the other is this regulation that is happening at a physiological level on this side. And so the training is in this kind of awareness that is brought in. And also in the listening for the teachers. Not really for the students. So largely we don't we do work with children, but and when you're talking about especially with younger children, what research has found is that the children don't need much. What they need is this kind of like environment where if the adults around, the significant adults around are more or less in this kind of like space, then they are able to kind of like settle and be more regulated. But we are also talking about other aspects that could affect the environment, like technology and things like that. So we also provide other tools or other ways. Like, for example, it doesn't have to be a meditation, but it could be ways like nature. Somebody mentioned nature. It could be just working with hands and soil. It could be in terms of just painting and just remaining with this flow of colors. So various ways which match the person. So it's not in terms of like building like one uniform way, but really seeing where people are and then just working with that. So just introducing them to various ways, various tools they could take to just come into this awareness.
I think Ajit ji had a question. He raised his hand before you. Is it okay? I mean, we do have time. So.
Yeah, this is a question to Sandy. I just wanted to get your comment. We took one school in Delhi, which was, I would say, one of the premium schools with thousands of students, and it was decided that all the teachers should be trained, all the students should be trained, and one day for the parents. And 11 people came from Plum Village. We were part of that. So the interesting observation was that the students participated, the teachers participated, but when it came to the question of the parents, we found that hardly parents coming. You said that you have been involving the parents, so I just want to get your understanding as what has been your experience and how did you involve the parents?
So, the experience is that, parents don't come. But I think they don't come so readily. But I don't think even teachers come so readily. It's like the program is set by the school, and so the teachers are expected to come. And first, there has to be this kind of like thing that what is it in it for me? I think, which was kind of like brought up. Why am I here? How am I going to kind of like benefit from this? And what are the main things that are really concerning me right now? So to really meet people where they are. So even parents have concerns. And then through listening, through dialogue, through kind of like really listening to what are their concerns, and then taking that forward in terms of like, okay, so what can we do about this, or the need for coming on the same page? We do a lot of work with families, and for the families to kind of like come together and really participate in this way. So then, because otherwise there's one member of the family who's learned something, and then it becomes really hard for the others to kind of like come along. And it's nice when the whole family kind of like. So how do you get them?
Yeah,
No, it's only
I think
it's only
that's
through.
really a question.
It's only through
Because
invitation.
at least the teachers have started talking, they have really started showing the interest. But if the third agent, which is part of this system,
Yes.
is not really brought in,
Yes.
I think it's not going to be very stable.
Yes, and yeah.
In today's context, even the best schools in Delhi, the parents are very clear. They want to have academic excellence,
Yeah.
not really that much importance or even no importance to the ethical side. So,
Yeah. I think parents are also under stress to make it to one meeting, to make it for that one workshop, where you're right, it's hard to kind of involve them, and it is critical to involve parents in this whole process. But I really think to meet people where they are is like really the way forward, but I don't have an answer to that. It's
Can I
something
just
that we struggle
say
with.
something? I think maybe because there is this whole idea in our times, in contemporary world, that there are all these different spaces which have no connection with each other. So probably the parents think that all ethical values are going to be imbibed by the kids through the family, and that's the space for that, and the school is for academic business, and that's how it is, and that's good enough. So they probably are not able to get out of this whole idea of life being so broken into different parts, whereas actually everything is held together, everything is holistic, so things flow into each other. But the parents basically need to understand that there are no watertight compartments, and that life flows into these spaces.
So at so the recent Mind Life conference, so what happened was the Canadian teachers had the same problems, but the fathers wouldn't come. There the mothers would come, but the fathers wouldn't come. So they would say, how do we get the fathers in? But the fathers are equally responsible for the child. So in this case, what was really interesting is these were teenage children that they were dealing with. So one father who works in the stock market came to the school and said, look, my teenage son is doing so well with regulating his emotions because he's been doing your program. He said, can you teach me how to regulate my emotions, because I'm always angry and upset and worried. So that could be one way that the children, when they benefit and the parents see the benefit and they see that the children are not throwing as many tantrums or they're behaving in a certain way or they're regulating their emotions, the parents then maybe will come in and say, how can I help myself now? So that to answer your question in that sense.
Well, I think you have well said. It's very simple. If you call the parents that your child is going to receive a wonderful prize from the school, I think they will come to receive it. Very simple.
So, can I now ask you something?
Yeah, you can ask a question.
So, my query to you is, so if happiness is an outcome of following ethics, or probably happiness is a goal which is derived from these ethics phenomena, how do you look at happiness being a feeling within the body in terms of you feel good, you feel good, it's a sensation that you feel good. If I donate, if I have some values, if I see a beggar in the street, I give something, I feel good. But at the same time, there could be a racket of beggars which could be going on, So I am feeling good because there are some values which are ethical. And in that moment, I feel that, yes, this is the right thing to do. Then how do you, so the query that flows out of this is, how do you see ethics and feeling good, is this some kind of a trap in itself? And then I would like to ask you, when we are talking about someone imparting ethical values, could be teachers, could be someone who's imparting these values so that it is accepted universally and we have a better world and probably a utopian world. How do we ensure that these people who are imparting these values, there is no conflict amongst them, that this is the right ethical value and this is, probably someone might think, no, this is the right ethical value. So there are two broad queries that I've put to you.
So I have 2 points that I'd like to make. One is there's a slight difference between when we say happiness or pleasure as temporary happiness or pleasure, and perhaps a deeper level of happiness which we're referring to. So a slightly more superficial or a pleasure sensation would be hot day, you're traveling outside in Delhi in the month of May and you enter an air-conditioned room at 18 degrees. What's your first feeling? Right? What happens in 5 minutes? Your sweat is stuck to your clothes, and then are you feeling as blissed out? And not really. Now you're beginning to feel cold and uncomfortable and you want the temperature to shift. So the idea of that kind of pleasure sensation which is coming from something external is not what we're referring to, but when we use the term happy, at least when I've been using the term happiness, it refers to a deeper level of contentment. So if I give you an analogy which Venerable Matthew Ricard uses, he talks about a deeper level of contentment or well-being in his book Happiness, and he talks about it as a... Can I...
I know there are several people who will be talking about things, but your own personal perspective.
Okay, so can I explain it?
Yeah, let her finish and then maybe you can ask.
So it would be a deeper level. So for example, if I have to come to Delhi, does it mean I don't have to go through issues or challenges? Yes, it does. Do those challenges affect me? To some extent, yes. Does it mean I need to be angry, irritable, upset because these challenges come? And the answer is no. So for me, that's coming from a deeper level of contentment, of recognizing many parts to the issues which are there, including my perception of flights being on time, cabbies being polite all the time, my set of assumptions about the world, which then interfere with my own degrees of happiness. So what it does is getting to know and becoming aware of that. What it does is it creates a deeper level of saying, all right, there is an issue and I can deal with it. Not that life is suddenly all problem-free, but that one doesn't get affected at the core that easily. For me, that becomes happiness. So, coming back to what Matthew Ricard said, he referred to it, and the analogy is beautiful. And the reason I'm insisting on saying it is because I think it's, as a metaphor, it's something powerful to hold on to. He talks about it as the deeper part of the sea. So the top part can get affected by the storms and everything else, but the deeper part stays a little unshakable. And perhaps developing that means that there's a greater sense of resiliency and a greater sense of saying, I want to stay kind and compassionate, so I don't need to A, B, C, D just because that's my old habit or that's what I've been trained for. The second part of what I wanted to speak was, we've just completed a course in Mumbai on Buddhist psychology, and through these 9 months of the course, we've seen students coming in with different kinds of issues. So it was not open only to mental health professionals, it was open to a whole wide array of people, and each one came with their own unique perspective and their own unique take on issues. But when they've left the course, because the course was really about application more than just theory, and really trying to find a blend of both, it had to do also with a lot of practice in terms of patience, in terms of generosity and other things. And what we find is that there is a shift in that space. All of the students who've been there, and that's the reason I couldn't be here yesterday, because we had our certification ceremony, and all of the students, this was the feedback that we consistently received from across the board, saying how much the practice makes a difference. The idea of learning to put these things in place, however, requires a considerable amount of time, patience, compassion, because you're changing habits which are reflex. Somebody is rude to me, I'm ready to lash back because so many things have happened in that fraction of a second. So working on self, it takes a lot of time.
Can I also say something?
Please.
Why do you think, do you think the reason for an education in universal values is to be happy with some kind of, let's say any kind of definition like contentment, putting things in perspective? It's, I think, not just about happiness. It's also about, in some ways, recognizing that as all of us being human, there is some kind of parity in our experiences, right? So education in universal values in some way makes a link between what happens to us and what is happening to other people. Because we do recognize that we are also equally vulnerable. So it's not just about happiness. It's also about making that connection, I think. And that's really why we always look at these universal values, whatever we've been talking about, empathy, compassion, and so on. What are these values? They are somehow connecting things that are going on in us through a kind of emotional intelligence with what's happening to other people. And then making that leap to see that we all feel similarly. And therefore this calls for some kind of empathetic response, right? So it's not just about happiness. Okay? Because happiness, I think, is notoriously hard to define.
Joya ji, you have a question as well.
I have a question. I wanted to address it to the previous panel, but this is possibly as distinguished a panel. So if I could ask this question now. I've been thinking a lot about even the title of this universal ethics. And we are meeting in a context. The context is India or the subcontinent, perhaps. And this, we actually represent a culture and a society that is terribly divided. It's divided vertically, it's divided, there's a lot of, a lot of castes. The People of India project found 4,700 separate groups, most of who don't allow intermarriage or interdining. And this becomes very critical. In the last century, interdining was a big thing for people going to college, school. How do you propose to formulate a universal ethics out of this? Because each group is guided by its own traditions. How would you suggest that a universal ethics is formulated?
Should I? Yeah. Well, I think largely when we are looking here, we've been talking across different perspectives, and we seem to have come up with things like non-violence, a regard for truth, compassion, and we seem to be all agreeing to these. And if you move away from religious perspectives, well, one way is that a lot of discussion on universal values takes place within liberal, political and social thought, where the values that are now spoken about are things like tolerance, civic friendship, mutual concern, and so on, from a non-religious perspective. Another way is to move within different religious traditions, look at the values which each religious tradition selects, and then look for an overlap between them. And you will find that the overlap mostly crystallizes around things like non-violence, kindness, compassion, and so on. So it's not that difficult a project. So you can either move with a liberal kind of space and look for values like civic friendship, tolerance, and so on, or you can move from within religious spaces to look at values on which different traditions overlap. And this kind of project, for instance, happens very fruitfully in a place like Canada, where philosophers have sat together and looked at this and come up with these values. And I think it looks more difficult than it is, because most religious people will come up with the very same values, right?
And yes, Professor Meenakshi.
I think some of you and some of us have been doing this work. For example, the first speaker talked about this, the different kinds of ethics, and that you have already worked on ethics of restraint. You have those books ready, and you've been doing it in different schools, in different parts of northern India and some cities. So maybe you could share some of your findings with us, because it will bring to us the fact that it is possible to do it in school. Now, in school, I know what you're talking about, that in particular schools we keep children, segregate children belonging to particular castes, or we segregate girls from boys and so on. Of course it happens. But we have to make a beginning somewhere. Because of that, we don't start. No, I think we should start and then just go along and see how it works out. So would you like to share with us some findings? Because I'm sure you didn't ask. I'm sure there would be different categories of children in any classroom in India. I would not like to ask, are you a Dalit or a non-Dalit or which, Sikh, of course, you may be able to see the Sikh, but I would not like to know whether they are Muslims or Christians and so on. So what has been the outcome? Maybe you can share with us some of your findings.
We did the pre-analysis and went to various schools. So education in India is supposedly to be secular. You cannot in a school, except if you're a minority school, it's a different matter, but you cannot ask the religion. You might be knowing about it, you might be having your ethical dilemmas about it, it's a different matter, but you cannot ask or you cannot discriminate on the basis of that. And as far as universality was concerned, like we first made a curriculum for the teachers, and so emotions, whatever religion, whatever age, whatever background you come from, emotions are going to be in everybody. So we talk to the teachers. First thing, we talk to them about the different types of emotions and how to recognize those emotions. So the first important step is to recognize the emotions. And the second important step is, like in restraint, we talk about that these emotions, if they are afflictive, and if they are affecting you as a person, you as a teacher, you as a member of the society, then these afflictive emotions have to be restrained. And there are processes by which they can be restrained. So if you understand how to restrain it in yourself, it'll be very easy to take it to the students. So that's how we first had sessions with the teachers, and we are not going very fast with our sessions, because after the sessions we are giving them time to internalize. So it took us 1 year. We have got just 10 pilot schools. It took us 1 year to talk to these teachers of these 10 pilot schools, and we are doing only to the middle school. So we are talking only to the middle school teachers, but challenges are there. So if there is a challenge, there has to be a will to overcome the challenge. And I think that we had the will, and all of us have the will. The challenges of the society I feel are not going to go away anywhere. So we thought it was a very good thought of His Holiness to come with the universality of the ethics, that the good is, if religion was doing all this, we wouldn't be sitting here. Because the religion is the problem, I feel that they are also teaching all good things, but they clash with each other. So that is the reason that we brought out this, that we will only talk about something without the religion. And don't bring religion into it, and bring the emotions into it, which is going to be with everybody. And that's how we are progressing, and the progress. So we are doing the pre-analysis, and we are also doing the post-analysis with the teachers. So as yet, we have not gone to the students. We have taken 1 year in this, and the teachers do come back to us and say that maybe little, but it is making the difference.
I think the point is also that not just that you go to the school and ask the people's religion and then look at their values, but the point is that the education in values should be religiously neutral. So either you draw from each and every religion, or you don't draw from any religion. Because if you speak about Christian values or Buddhist values to somebody who is from a Muslim background, that immediately kind of makes them hostile to it. So that, I think, was the way that I took that question. I was more speaking about policy makers, that they would either draw from all the religions and look for an overlapping consensus, which is Rawls' point as well, I think.
I think we need to close the session soon, and so we'll leave any of the questions for lunchtime. But let me summarize this panel. It was a wonderful presentations by all the speakers today. Basically, how do we implement? And yes, we can talk philosophy, concept, but how do we implement? Again and again, it came up that the teachers need to be trained, the adults need to be trained. We also spoke about identifying universality, localizing universal ethics, and mindfulness, and also finally, do I really want to be like this? This is the most important question that we have to ask ourselves. Do I really want to be like this? Thank you for listening and your patience.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for their
Very well
enlightening talk. Now, may I please request Mrs. Antonella Maturji to come on the dais to felicitate our respected chairperson and our esteemed speakers with the scarf and the souvenirs.
Please cheer once again for this all-women panel.
Dr. Anita Dudani ji. Mrs. Anshu Sai ji. Mrs. Sandy Dias ji. Dr. Navedita Jalil ji. Professor Bindu Puri ji.
And the woman. Yes, it was women panel.
We will resume our next session at 2:30.